Hello and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am your host, Janet Sandberg, and today we are joined by Michael Tallon, who is currently in very beautiful Guatemala. Michael, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Of course. Let's start by learning a little bit about you and, who you are and what you do.
Very good. Yeah, as you noted, my name is Michael Tallon. I am originally from the United States, but I've been spending most of my time in Central America, specifically in the former colonial capital of Mesoamerica, Antigua, Guatemala, which is a gorgeous 10 block by 10 block city that was originally constructed in the 16th century and holds much of that old charm. And so, though you can't see it from inside my terrace of my apartment, just about 5 miles to my right, heading that way, is a gorgeous volcano. About 20 miles over my right shoulder are two other gorgeous volcanoes, one of them active. And when I go to the market in the day, I get to walk down cobblestone streets past 16th, 17th, and 18th century architecture, and it's an absolutely beautiful place. I'm originally from upstate New York. I grew up in a place called Binghamton, New York, and after graduating from university, I moved and getting my master's degree in my hometown of Binghamton. I moved to Brooklyn, New York, where I was a teacher for 13 years, teaching social studies. And in 2004, my life became somewhat akin to a Benny Hill sketch. For reasons that aren't exactly pertinent to what we'll be discussing today. And I ended up deciding to go on a 1-year trip through Central and South America. And I ended up here in Antigua, and I just sort of ended up unexpectedly putting down roots and really starting to dig into what has become my second career as a writer. For 11 years, I had an English language, cultural, artistic, and political magazine that I ran down here. I ran that to segue into what will likely be the rest of our conversation. I ran that from about 2004 to 2015. And then in 2015, I very unexpectedly had a major health crisis caused by a genetic condition, which we'll get into, I'm sure, in the conversation. And that landed me in a grave ill health. And I ended up in the hospital. I went back to the States. And when I survived that experience, I realized that the book that I wrote that came out of this is called Incompatible with Life. Which is how the doctors described me when I arrived in the emergency room.
Oh, no.
And subsequently, since my recovery and since my real critical moment, which will be the main part of the conversation today, I have rallied back to physical health, but also spiritual health. And part of that process was taking my skills as a writer and attempting to write a memoir, which is currently with my agent, and fingers crossed will be published soon. That details the trajectory of that story from living as a ne'er-do-well, but fun to be around. Celebrator of life in Antigua, Guatemala, where I was a bartender and a magazine owner and all of that, through the serious dip in my health, the real crisis, and then back out the other side. So that's a little bit about me.
So we get a mini version of the book here today.
Yes, since it is in some ways the chapter that is about my very, very close call with taking my own life. It is really sort of the emotional pivot of the book.
Okay.
Where after being interrupted in an attempt by my best friend, I decide that I go through I think you might call it a phoenix-like rebirth. And so yes, so we'll be since the story of my brush with suicide is integral to the book, I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that too.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go there. Let's dive into it. What was the story? What was going on?
Okay. So I'm now 58 years old, and the action of this all kind of starts to take place when I'm 48 years old. And at the time, I had been living in Central America, running my magazine and being a bartender and living my celebratory life, which did involve a lot of not exactly healthy behaviors.
Sure.
I was drinking, smoking, partying, and I kind of realized probably when I turned 45 or so 3 years before the crisis, that things were starting to go a little bit sideways. I was putting on weight. My libido was absolutely waning. My energy at the gym was declined, and I just kind of felt like I wasn't myself, like things were starting to fall apart. But also, one of the things about life is that you don't get a guidebook.
Correct.
And so at 45 years old, I'm putting on weight and my libido is waning and my energy in the gym is waning. And I'm, just generally kind of losing my health and my fitness and my vim and vigor. I think that it's just because I'm 45.
Right. You're like, I'm just getting old.
Right. This is what happens. This is
Yeah.
this is this is how we age. And also being a fairly, deep bug typical human male, I didn't listen to my body when it was saying
Mhm.
something is wrong. I was just like, I don't want to be bothered with the doctors. I don't want to deal with any of that stuff. And so I just kind of tried to push through it. By still going to the gym, even if I couldn't run as fast as I was before, turning to chemical assistance to try and deal with my waning libido. And so I never knew that there was actually something that was going seriously
Right.
wrong in my body until I came home from a walk one day, and at the time I was living in a 2-story apartment on the second floor, and it was 12 steps to get from the entry to the second floor of my apartment. And I walked up, and I had to sit down at the top of the stairs and catch my
Oh,
breath. And at that point, my best friend and my partner at the time, a woman named Mercedes, she said, "Look, dude, this is not right.
yeah.
Something's going wrong. You've got to go to the doctor." And so I begrudgingly agreed. And I went to a local doctor who I knew was a skilled physician. And she said, "Well, you're low on energy. Let me check your blood sugar. It's probably diabetes." And she did a finger stick, and sure enough, it was diabetes. And so she said, "You have that. Here's some metformin. Take it. We're going to have to adjust your diet, but you'll probably start to feel pretty good again in a week." And a week went by, and I didn't start to feel any better. So I went back to her, and she said, "You're not going to like this, but it might be a little bit more complex than just diabetes. So I have to send you for a sonogram on your liver to see if you have some liver damage."
Okay.
And I went to a local radiology office, and they did the scan, and they determined that I had really quite significant liver cirrhosis. And I went back to her office, and she said, "Look, you've got diabetes and you've got liver cirrhosis. We don't know the origins of that, but
Right.
I was a bartender, and so pretty easy to draw a conclusion that it's probably alcohol consumption related."
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I can put together a medical team here in Guatemala, but quite honestly, you're sick, and maybe it's time to go back to the States."
Right.
And so I went home. I talked to my partner, and she said, "You look like hell. Go lay down." So I went and laid down. She arranged a ticket for me the next day. And I flew back to New York, where my parents were living. And when I returned back in New York, I'll try and tell this part of the story a little quickly. I got back, got engaged with a number of doctors there, got engaged with a hepatologist. The hepatologist did further scans, discovered that the liver damage was so bad, I was almost certainly going to need a liver transplant.
Oh my.
And he also, we still don't know what the origin cause of all this stuff is. We're assuming it's alcoholic cirrhosis.
Okay.
And he says the thing that we need to worry about immediately is that because of the rigidity and the scarification of your liver, you have extraordinarily high blood pressure, hepatic blood pressure inside the liver,
Oh.
which could cause a rupture of something called the portal vein, which
Oh
is the
my
vein
gosh.
that comes up from the intestines up into the liver, bringing in the blood that needs to be cleaned by the liver. And if that were to happen, he said that I'd bleed out in 5 minutes. It would just,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's the second
Big
largest vein.
one. Yeah.
And he said, this is what we have to worry about immediately, not knowing the complexity of the issue that we were to discover. And so he gave me a beta blocker that would lower my blood pressure to prevent my liver from popping. And he said, "Go home, and before you go to bed, take this pill." I went home and I took that pill before bed, and 5 minutes, if that later, I just face planted onto the mattress
Oh.
and was dying. And thank God my mother heard me. I don't know how she did. I could not move.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I landed on the mattress with my head turned to the side, and I was looking at the alarm clock, which read 11:05 p.m. And I tried to roll over, but I couldn't move. And I tried to call out to my parents, and I tried to shout, "Something's wrong." but I couldn't get my voice above a whisper. And I watched the clock click a couple of minutes, and I really remember
Oh
thinking
my
that,
gosh.
Jesus God, I didn't expect that you could die so fast.
Yeah.
And then my mom, I later asked my mom how she knew to come into the guest room where I was staying, and she just said, "Well, I'm your mom."
Yeah. Yeah. You just
And
feel it, you sense it, you know it.
yep.
Yep.
And so she came in, and my father came in, and they immediately called the EMS. And my mother was a nurse for her career, and so she did immediate first aid, lifting my
Okay.
feet up above my head and getting more blood flow to my brain and my heart. The EMS showed up, and they took my blood pressure, which was 40 over 25.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and they rushed me to the hospital and ended up at Mount Sinai Hospital, where I entered the hospital and was I'm not sure, no reason that people who haven't had cardiac problems would know this, but some of your audience might. My ejection fraction at the time, which is a measure that's used to determine the significance of the how significant one's heart disease is. It's a healthy heart normally has an EF, an ejection fraction of 55 to 60%.
Okay.
It's the amount of blood that leaves the heart on every contraction,
Okay.
because you don't want to squeeze all of it out because you don't want a dry pump. Heart disease starts at about 45 down to 30. You're in severe heart failure. I was at a 10, which is where
Like
my
he's basically not doing anything.
my cardiologist actually said to me months after this, after I had survived all of this, she said, when we first met, your heart wasn't really beating. It was just sort of quivering. And she said I was in something called cardiogenic shock, which somehow I managed to survive for over 24 hours. And anyway, to kind of move the story along to get to what the subject of the podcast is, we eventually determined that all of these systemic issues, my heart disease, my liver disease, my pancreatic disease, and as we later discovered, some glandular disorders too that have rendered me sterile, it is a genetic condition known as hereditary hemochromatosis.
Oh.
It
Okay.
is
Yeah.
an iron processing disorder, which I inherited from a Neanderthal ancestor, which I think is kind of cool. And it prevents my body from successfully eliminating dietary iron. And over the course of those first 48 years,
Hmm.
that iron, sort of like, literally figuratively sweeping it under the rug, once you have a superabundance of iron in your body looks for places to put it. At first, it puts it in your bloodstream, in your spleen, and your bone marrow, which is where the iron is supposed to be stored. When it runs out of space, it starts to stick it wherever it can. And those places are your joints, which is why I ended up with arthritis, your heart, which is why I ended up in cardiogenic shock, your liver, which is why I ended up with cirrhosis, your pancreas, which is why I ended up with diabetes, and your glandular system, which is why I ended up sterile. And so that was what brought me to this moment of this period of significant crisis. I was hospitalized for about a month. And as I noted, the liver doctor, my hepatologist, originally thought that I was going to need a liver transplant to survive. And we quickly discovered that my heart was so badly damaged, I was probably going to need a heart liver transplant to
Wow.
survive. And through a series of fortunate events and very, very good medicine, a lot of luck, and also, honest to God, I believe some spiritual realignment towards the greater forces of the universe, I was able to survive that passage. And I have all my original parts. Some of them don't work very well,
Mhm.
but I have them. I haven't had to have the transplant surgery.
Okay.
And I was able to transit that period in the hospital. They were able to remove a significant amount of the iron from my body, detoxifying my organs through phlebotomy, bloodletting. Over the course of the year after I left the hospital, I went essentially donated blood, though they threw it out because it was.
Yeah. I don't want to use it on anybody else.
But I donated blood. I gave half a liter of blood over 100 times that year. So
Wow.
I was doing 2 bloodlettings a week. It was a tired time,
Yeah.
and so to kind of bring us to the thread of the tale, I was not expected to leave the hospital when I was there,
Hmm.
and I went through significant internal changes, spiritual changes with what that meant, and it is something to say goodbye to your partner at the end of visiting hours, um, and to have her bend down and give you a kiss, and to honest to God think, I'm not going to see her tomorrow. I'm not going to
Hmm.
make it through the night. And coming to terms with that, And so when I had this really unexpected change in my prognosis, which happened about 3 weeks into the hospital, into my hospitalization, and I went from talking about heart transplant one day, and then 2 days later they're talking about discharging me. Uh, I returned back to my parents' apartment 2 days later when they discharged me, still seriously, seriously, seriously ill, and I was thrilled because I had made it through the crisis. Only as people who have wrestled with some of the darker moments that this universe can throw at them, man, you think you're through it, and then you realize that it's just beginning.
Right.
And so what brought me to my crisis moment was actually I had been home for 2 days. And also crazily, it still makes no sense to me. I just throw this in there because it added to the intense emotional dislocation of all of it. So the day that they rushed me to the hospital, I don't come from a religious family. We were kind of technically Catholic, but it's not a huge part of our lives. But I do remember being in the ambulance and my father is sitting next to me and I look up and he's very clearly praying, which is
Right.
something he doesn't do. At least something that was was not in our, in a foxhole, everybody's religious.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, to tie this in, I'm in the emergency room for about 12 hours. About 6 hours into that process, at about 6 o'clock in the morning, my father just kind of wanders away from the emergency room. And when he comes back, he is different. Something is wrong. And I spend the next month wondering what the hell is wrong with my dad. And I don't find out until the day I get home from the hospital because they didn't want to tell me.
Right.
At 6 o'clock in the morning, my father went to use the restroom in the emergency room and he urinated blood,
Oh my God.
which turned out to be the beginning of a cancer diagnosis
Sure.
for him, and for him led to some really serious problems as well. The cancer, but also just imagine the prayer that a father is having over his dying son. And we never spoke about this directly. My father passed earlier this year, and we never talked about this directly. But I am certain as certain can be that he was saying, God, if you got to take somebody, take me.
Mm.
And 6 hours later, God says, deal.
Okay.
And so
Wow.
when I got out of the hospital, they told me that. And now I was afraid that my father was going to die, and also kind of wondering if that was somehow my fault,
Mm.
even though I knew
Mm-hmm.
consciously it wasn't. But the real crisis moment came is I was exhausted all of the time, obviously,
Yeah.
with all these problems. And I was thrilled to be home. But then the first day I was home, the first full day I was home, I was up for the day. I needed help getting up and around the apartment. I wasn't steady on my feet. I had lost 40 pounds in a month.
Oh my gosh.
And I was incredibly weak, and also in heart disease and with liver cirrhosis and all that other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I just, I sat down on the couch in the living room, and then I laid down on the couch in the living room, and I passed out, which is fine. I needed the rest. But then I woke up, an hour later or something, because I had to pee, and I couldn't get up. I
Oh.
couldn't stand up from the couch. And my partner came over. She helped me stand up, and she walked me to the bathroom. And while she was walking me to the bathroom, like supporting my weight, she also said, "I love you, dude, but if you want to share a bed with me, you got to shower because you stink like really bad French cheese." And I was like, "I'll do it tomorrow," and she's like, "No, you'll do that today."
Mm-hmm.
And so we got into the bathroom, and we realized quickly when she like let go of me to get a towel or something, and I almost fell down, that I was not going to be able to stand up for a shower. And so this was going to have to be a bath. And I got undressed. She helped me get undressed. And it was the first time that I had seen my body in a month. And I had to wear a heart monitor at the time. And so I've got all of these, all the heart monitor lines looping on me. I'm black and blue everywhere from the IVs. And also they had me on blood thinners. So every place I got touched, I was bruised. And I looked like garbage. I looked like someone had thrown me away and left me in the garbage for a while. And I then, I got to get in the bathtub. And so I kind of stagger over to the bathtub. I try and lift one leg up to put it into the bathtub, and my other leg buckles, and Mercedes has to catch me. And I am mortified. And she helps lower me down into the bathtub. And I realize there's not a chance in hell I'm going to be able to get out of the bathtub
Right.
on my own. And she turns on the water. And the water was a little hotter than I liked, but I'm not gonna. I had other things to worry about.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, you want me to stay? And at that point, I was like, really, I was not my best self.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, don't, I'm not a fucking baby. Leave me alone. I'm going to be okay. Just let me just kind of, get the hell out of here and leave me alone. And being very understanding and knowing me very well, she was like, okay, I'll be out in the other room. And that left me alone in the bathtub, which is where I nearly ended my life. It so the chapter in the book is actually it's called Tithonus in the Bathtub. And Tithonus, not one of the better known Greek mythological figures, was earlier in his life was a handsome and charming man, handsome enough to win the eye of Ea, the goddess of the dawn. And they fell in love and they had an absolutely perfect life together. And they met when they were 15 or 16 years old, or he was 15 or 16. She's immortal, which becomes pretty important in the story. And they lived 10 years together just fine. He's 25, she's immortal. And then, 10 years later at 35, he's starting to see a couple of gray hairs. And then at 45, he's starting to see more gray hairs. And Aya kind of realizes that the real flaw in this coupling is that she's immortal and he's going to die.
Right.
So she goes to Zeus and she says, Dad, I need you to help me out. I'm in love with this really cute boy. Can you make him immortal? And the one thing you'll learn if you study any Greek myths is just don't ever ask. Just don't. And Zeus is like, of course, my darling, I can make him immortal. And zap, he is made immortal. And she goes back home. And then 10 years later, the gray hair is really filling in. And then 10 years after that, he's starting to walk with a cane. And she goes back to Zeus and she says, like, what gives? And he says, well, you asked for your lover to be immortal, so he's never going to die. And she says, but he's looking different. She says, oh, yeah, he's going to keep aging.
Oh, God.
And so Tithonus, ends up at 100 years old, 200 years old, 300 years old, and just becomes progressively weaker and weaker and weaker.
Mm-hmm.
And his story ends when Ea finally convinces Zeus to turn him into a cricket or a cicada, which is where you get cicadas from if you believe Greek mythological stories. But in the bathtub, I read all this stuff, and so I'm looking down at my body, and I'm like, holy Jesus! I mean, I'm Tithonus at 500 years old.
Mm.
And I can't deal with this. I've just got to close my eyes. And so I lean back in the tub and I just put a washcloth over my eyes. I'm trying to think this isn't my fucking life. This isn't my fucking life. And about a minute later, the water is now risen significantly. The tub is now almost full and too hot. And I just start to kind of go woozy.
Yeah.
And so I take off, I lean forward a little bit and I drop the washcloth and I look down and my body I look like a pointillist tomato. I mean, I'm just red everywhere, just like a red rash all over my body, which is due to the heat. It wasn't too hot for someone who's healthy, but it just completely overwhelmed my capacity. All of my blood vessels had dilated and my blood pressure, which was not strong at that point, just collapsed.
Yeah.
And I started to go. And I realized that if I go, I'm going into the water.
Mm.
And I'm not going to be able to get out of that water. And so I kind of flop my body forward and turn the faucet key and turn on the cold water and survive that crisis, but not unscathed. I'm like, I just remember the cascade of thoughts. I'm like, I can't even wash myself. I can't, I'm not even safe in a bathtub. And I still, the doctors still think that I'm going to need a heart and a liver transplant. And no one, waiting for a heart and liver transplant, it's shortest window for that is 7 years on a waiting list. And the doctors aren't really sure. They're pretty sure I'm not going to last that long. And I remember thinking at that point, my niece, was she was a teenager and I'm like I'm not gonna see Julia when she graduates from college, and I'm not gonna see Patrick, her brother, when he graduates from high school, and I'm and look at me. I mean, my whole life I had been really active. You know, I'm a hiker, I'm a runner, I'm a cyclist. I've done all of this stuff, which actually kind of in a strange way that the forces of the world move together. I was a really quite a rugged athlete for most of my younger life, partially because I had an overabundance of
Iron.
iron.
Yeah.
Had really high hemoglobin, and so when I'm hiking in the Andes and I'm up at 14,000 feet,
You're fine.
I'm fine. I'm smoking a cigarette and drinking a bottle of whiskey, and I feel great. And now all of that's gone. And there were a couple other things that really brought me to the terminal point. And I was like, I'm thinking about my niece and my nephew, and I'm like, I've just got to deal with what's in front of me right now. I've got to wash my body, and I started at my legs, and they were just so skinny, and the skin is raw, and I remember I'm like kind of working the soap up, and I get up to my thighs, and like I remember being in the hospital and the doctors kind of casually remarking that the iron overload had affected my glandular system and that there might be some significant sexual dysfunction
Okay.
was the term. And, but that was wrapped in with heart disease and liver transplant and all that. But I do remember when that floated by, I was sort of like, what's that about significant sexual dysfunction? But we kind of just rode right past that. And I'm in the bathtub and I'm like, I've got to confront this. And so I started to touch myself to see if there would be any reaction at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like touching a mannequin. I just had absolutely zero sexual response whatsoever. And I remember I even took the washcloth. I'm like, maybe a little bit of pain will help. And, and it was just abrasion on a part of my body. It was,
Right.
no sexual stimulation whatsoever. And I just realized, oh my God, I'm sexually dead. This is inert. This is dead. And then I started thinking about my partner. And I'm like, how am I ever gonna she's going to let me sleep next to her if I take this bath, but for how long?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm I'm a eunuch. I'm a eunuch. And I don't and that's a heavy blow to take in a moment. And I'm like, fuck it, I've got to put that away. Just keep focusing on the moment. So I started washing my body and I started washing my chest. And then I started washing my shoulders, and just got the soap up, and I'm washing my shoulder. And every time I lift my hand above my heart just starts to get chaotic, and it falls down. And I'm like, I can't do that. And I'm like, I've got to wash my hair. I put the shampoo on my hands, and I like, okay, I'm gonna wash my hair. And I started washing my hair, and I could hold my arms up like this for about 2 seconds, and then they just fell into the water.
Mm.
And I did it again. I remember it was so stupid, but I remember trying to like tie my fingers into a knot so that they would rest on my head without coming apart,
Right.
and they wouldn't. And I'm laying there in the tub, and I'm like, I remember thinking the line that came to me is that rats can wash themselves,
Mm.
and I can't even wash myself. And I'm a eunuch. I'm this disgusting little cricket, this broken, infinitely old, like, what the fuck am I even bothering with here? Why? Why would I put my partner through that?
Mm-hmm.
Why would I ask her to dedicate the next 5 or 7 years of her life to sleeping next to me and loving me and caring for me when I cannot be her lover. And at that point, when I'm in the tub, it's like I can't even I can't even like scratch her back.
Yeah.
And I thought about like I've been living this life where I've been like traveling the world and being the life of the party and going to hike in the Himalayas, and I've hiked in Alaska and I've hiked in the Andes and I've been all over the fucking world. And from here on out, my life is going to be being an invalid
Mm-hmm.
and
Bedroom
having
and the bathroom and
the bedroom and the
maybe the
bathroom.
kitchen on a good day.
Right. And that my I'm gonna be living with my mom and dad until I die. And it just was a moment where it was just like this isn't it was a moment I really think that this is if there is a step towards the edge, part of that step towards the edge is rationalizing how making this decision is good for everyone else. And I knew that it would be uncomfortable, and there would be mourning, and there would be grieving. But also I know that mourning and grieving end. Like, within a period of time, Mercedes would find another partner, one who could actually be a partner. My niece and my nephew, when they graduated from college and from high school, they would be sad I wasn't there, but their friends would be there, and then they'd be off to. And I would be a family story. And, I'd be like my cousin Danny, who died when he was young and didn't specifically take his own life, but made some choices towards the ends with drugs and alcohol that were.
Didn't
I can't say
extend
for
his
sure.
life.
I can't say for sure, and I want to be careful because that's a precious and painful memory for the family. But 30 years after Danny left us, we're all still sad. We all loved him very much. But you heal, you move on, and my parents would, and my partner would, and my brothers would, and my friends would, and I wouldn't have to deal with all of this. I'm like, it just made sense. It was just a clear moment where it's like this is just fucking scene, just like end it here. And I'm like, now all I got to do is, even though I am an American citizen, I don't have a gun in the house. But there's a window, there's a subway track, and to do this. And then I realized I didn't need any of that. All I needed to do was lift my legs off of the wall by the faucet.
Mm-hmm.
All I needed to do was lift my legs and drop my body under the water. And I would not have the strength to come out of that. And I thought about it, and it was almost like this is the perfect crime. Because if I do this, then the story can be told that it was just a tragic accident, right?
Yeah.
That, if there's any stigma that would be attached to it, the story that is pre-written for my family and for Mercedes, if I do this, is that he was unbelievably strong. He made it through the crisis. He made it home. No one expected him to. The doctors thought he was going to die weeks before, but he was strong enough to make it home. But then, it was just this one thing. And if it wasn't that, it probably would have been something else. And I was like, that's a story. That's a story that can be used to heal the family after I'm gone. And I actually thought of Ophelia. I'm like, drowning after it happens is an incredibly peaceful scene.
Yeah.
You're there, you're under the water. I promised myself that I would close my eyes. All I had to do was sink, lift my feet, sink, and inhale. And it was just 3 easy steps. And I, of course, wrestled with the decision. And I decided to check my dick one more time. Uh,
Just in
uh,
case.
just in case. And I reached down and I touched myself again, and I was like, nope, 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 nope. I don't want to live this life as a fucking invalid and as a burden on my family and as a eunuch. I I don't want it, and I resolved that it was time to go. And I sat with the thought for a couple of minutes, and I determined to do it. And as I was finding my resolve and preparing to lift my feet, and who knows how close is close, right?
Yeah.
The only people who know how close is are the ones we lose.
Yeah.
But I was going. I was ready to go. And just as I was about to pull my feet from the wall, Mercedes knocked at the door. And she said, you okay? And I was like, fuck off, I'm fine. And, leave me alone, I'm not a baby. And also, as soon as she knocked at the door and I heard her voice, I was mortified.
Mm.
And she came in because she did. And I'm like, one, she can never know this. Like, no one can ever know about my secret plan, which was going to just look like an accident. But she came over and she sat down next to me, and she kind of, squatted down next to the bathtub, and she started to help me wash my shoulders, and she could tell that I was emotionally distraught. And then she said, your dad's going to be home in about 20 minutes, and because of his fucking bladder cancer, it's like he's going to need to get in here, so we should probably get out. And at that, like, when she said that, I was just like, oh my god, I almost made my father walk into the bathroom and find his son
Mm-hmm.
dead. And like, I don't know why, but that, like like I'm picturing this peaceful scene where everybody's like, oh, that's so sad. But it wouldn't have been that at all. It would have been my father coming into the worst moment of his life.
Yeah.
And so I was like, yeah, we should get up, we should get out. And so I couldn't stand up. So Mercedes put her arms around me and she helped lift me up, which wasn't that hard because I was so skinny at the time. And she helps me step out of the bathtub. And as I do, I turn around. So she's holding me from behind and I'm soaking wet.
Mm-hmm.
And then, she helps me put on a towel and I turn around and my ass has like pushed back up against her front and it looks like she's peed her pants. Wet, now her jeans are all wet and 5 minutes after my absolute surety that it was time to end my life, the two of us are laughing at how it looks like she peed her pants. And I guess it's a silly thing, but also that was it was also critical because that laugh was also a moment of realization that okay, I guess I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do the end it all here thing. So I got to do something else. So that something else is going to be doing everything I can to make sure that I can continue to laugh with her. And so that night we got into bed. And she was, we watched a little TV and then she invited me actually. It's normally, I'm physically larger. So normally when we were together, she'd have her head on my shoulder. But that night, she was like, put my head on her shoulder and she just kind of gave me a safe space to be. And when she went to sleep, she rolled over onto her right side and I was behind her. And I remember just I remember I had to put my fist under my elbow to lift it up a little bit so that I could just touch her shoulder and run down the side of her body and kind of over the round of her hip. And it was just in those moments with her that there was a commitment that I had a job to do, and that job was to live.
Yeah.
And so to kind of wrap up the that particular scene, the next day, I got up. I didn't tell anybody about this. Didn't tell her about it. And the next afternoon, I took a nap on the couch. And when I got up to take a pee, because I had to pee, I tried to get up from the couch, and Mercedes stood up. She was in a chair reading, and she stood up to help me. And I was just like, nope. I got to do this on my own. And I remember I was able to sit up on the couch, but it was too low to stand up.
Mm-hmm.
So I flopped over onto so my hands were on the cushions of the couch, and I dropped my knees to the floor. And then with my arms, my arms and legs, I was kind of able to just barely stand myself up into a half stand. And then I shuffled over to the arm of the couch and was able to get myself upright. And I was able to start walking to the bathroom. Mercedes did come along and make sure I didn't fall. But that was really it in some ways it started at that fucking couch, and it needed to the recovery needed to start at that couch. I needed to do that on my own. And then after that, it was just every day was a little bit. And I started, Mercedes had to come back to Guatemala, so she was gone. My mom and dad had to go back to work, so they were gone. I'm alone in the apartment. I remember dragging chairs and ottomans around the apartment to make a little archipelago of safe island so that I could safely get to the bathroom. And when I did that, I could then walk to the bathroom and back. And if I had to stop, I could stop and rest. And then it was, do that twice and then 3 times. And then it was walk down the hallway to the elevator and back. And it was just, and quite honestly, from that day to this one, I've just become dedicated to maintaining my physical fitness. And I actually, for a very clear reason, part of the spiritual realignment was in the hospital, and what came afterwards was an understanding that prior to the suicidal crisis, when I thought that I was just going to die, you start to think about what's important, and it becomes achingly clear, or it became achingly clear to me in the moment when I was in the hospital feeling all of this, that the only goddamn thing that we're here to do is love one another.
Yes.
And the kind of, not exactly a pithy sentence, but it works for me. I have come to understand that the purpose of life is to apprehend, to create, and to transmit love in its three fundamental wavelengths of truth, beauty, and light.
Mm.
And so, since the day of the crisis to today, I kind of use that as my guidepost, understanding that no matter how much you take care of these frail bodies, they fail eventually.
Mhm.
But if you do maintain them and you do maintain the connections and the commitments in your life, then you have more time in which to apprehend, create, and transmit love in its three fundamental wavelengths of truth, beauty, and light. So get your ass to the gym, which I do, and really quite surprisingly, my doctors can't believe it. I can't believe it. I am now, I have liver cirrhosis, I have diabetes, I'm on hormone replacement therapy for my severe sexual dysfunction issues, I have arthritis, I have all these other conditions, but I'm also in the best shape mentally and physically and spiritually than I've ever been. So that
Amazing.
that kind of nuts. That kind of tells that part of the story.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Wow. It's amazing. It's hard to comprehend, so many stories that we share, or that have been shared on the podcast. There's external things that are happening in people's lives that, make everything seem hopeless, or there's too much pain or whatever. But I think you're maybe the first story where it's your own body that's failing, like by somebody having such severe health crisis that they're faced with that life or death situation in this way, and then to come back from that and just kind of look it in the eye and be like, not today.
Not today.
And
Not today.
yeah,
Not today.
and just keep
Not.
going and do what the little bit that you can every day. And I love that. Just playing The Floor is Lava with the Ottomans.
Yeah.
It's really something that it's mystifying to me that as human beings, we can go from that place of this life isn't worth living to, no, I'm going to do everything I can to keep living.
Yes. Yeah, and also part of the reason that I think it is so important to have these conversations is that, I believe that every sentient being with the capacity for complex thought at some point realizes that living in a morally unscaffolded universe is not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of us, to one degree or another, are just like, why? Why the hell why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that the consideration of ending your own life is one of the most fundamentally human. It is one of the most fundamentally human
Absolutely.
that you can do. And I also, we get into the hairier ends of this with, self-directed euthanasia, but I think that there are also, I think that there are times, I think that first, if the scientists and the writers of the Marvel Cinematic Universe are correct, and we
Mm-hmm.
live in a multiverse,
Yes.
it is not lost on me that in almost every single one of those universes, I'm dead. And so I've got a special responsibility towards making sure that this storyline maintains coherency for as long as possible, because I'm.
Mm-hmm.
10 years from now, or if 10 days from now, I end up with with another set of conditions that brings me to that edge. um I don't know what the decision will be then. And I have had friends who have chosen to end their own lives very consciously and in a way that I don't consider a tragedy. Deciding that you're going to take all the OxyContin in your bedside table rather than dealing with MS,
Right.
end stage MS.
Yeah.
or ALS. So I think also part of the removal of the stigma of talking about suicide is with a recognition that put a warning on this for your listeners if you need to. But there are moments where it's not the wrong choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for me, it would have been the wrong damn choice because, as it happens, even though the doctors didn't think I was going to be able to live independently and that my heart disease, my ejection fraction, as it has, is going to come back up to 55%, and that my diabetes is under control, and that my liver cirrhosis, while it still is there, is not impacting my life, and that my sexual dysfunction issues have been handled by hormone replacement therapy. I'm glad that I stuck around to find all that stuff out because man, life is good. So, but yeah,
And
it's
that's it right there. That's the crux of it. You
yep,
just have to stick around long enough to find out and to make the conscious decision and the actions to ensure that life is good.
damn straight. Yes.
Yeah. You can't just
Another
keep living passively
no.
and, expect life to be good.
God no. In fact, to cut back to the beginning of the story, when when I'm first in my hepatologist's office, and he says, you've got stage 4 liver cirrhosis, and if you drink, you're going to die. And he said, I really think you should start going to AA meetings. And I said, I don't think I need that. I'm not going to drink again. And he just looked at me with this kind of like look at it, shake of his head, and he said, dude, everybody who comes to my office says that. And so being, I have been to AA meetings, but I'm not actively in the 12-step program, but I am very, very dedicated to my sobriety because my sobriety is implicitly connected
Yeah.
with my health, which is implicitly connected with my continued ability to laugh and smile and meet wonderful new people like yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
It would have been just as easy to say, rather than I'm going to do the work, it could have been just like the bottle's there, take it and go. But
Yeah. Amazing. What advice would you give to somebody who is contemplating ending their life?
that shit you tell yourself about how it's really going to be okay for your family if you do it, that's not true. Um, your father or your son is not going to walk into the scene of your self-murder and say, well, we'll get over that. That is a
He looks peaceful.
he looks peaceful. No, it is going to be an endless series of recriminations, and it is not going to be focused upon your peacefully planned, rationalized exit. You're going to saddle the people that love you with questions for the rest of their days about what they could have done to make sure that you didn't make that one choice. And so that is my principal advice, and it's cautionary. And there's other advice that hey, you never know, stuff might get better, and in most cases it will get better if you connect yourself to community, if you are honest and open about your feelings, and if you reach out for help when you need it. It will get better.
Yes.
And all of that is important too, but it's the cautionary tale. It's like, no, your dad is not going to be like, oh, he went peacefully. Your dad is going to spend the rest of his already complex and challenging life saying, I failed my son. And that is a terrible thing to lay at someone else's doorstep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Remind me of the three love things that you said.
Yes.
Was apprehend.
It is, and the way I think of it is in a process, and the way I think about it is with an understanding. It is actually with an understanding that love is what unites the universe. And do we have 5 minutes for this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So when I was very, very ill, and I will come back to answer your question in a second. When I was at my most ill point, about 3 weeks into the hospital, and when I had undergone 6 phlebotomies over the course of 3 days, so they had reduced the amount of blood in my body by 40%.
Oh my gosh.
And you know how tired you get when you give blood? Magnify that by 1,000. And also, it's you get pretty disassociated.
Yeah.
And long story, when the book is out there, you should read the book. But I decided that I wanted to meet that Neanderthal grandmother of mine, who was the first person with hereditary hemochromatosis. And in a series of rather astounding hallucinations one night in the hospital, I regressed through time and saw her walking through a snowstorm And I remember very clearly looking down at her, kind of floating above her, and encouraging her to continue, because if she gave up in that snowstorm, it's not just her life, it is absolutely everyone who comes from her. It is my father and my mother, because I have both alleles of this particular genetic condition, which all came from her. It's my grandparents, and it's everyone going back in a line from her to me. And after I met her, and I can still picture her with this giant jaw that could crush a deer's femur, but also with intelligent eyes and the ability to think and with language, I realized that, well, I am connected to her in a direct lineal way. I'm also connected to all of her ancestors, and in my hallucinatory space, I decided and regressed all the way back to the beginning. And I'd learned all this stuff in the course of my studies, in the course of my life. And so I had an internal architecture to build what the early Earth looked like. And in my hallucinatory state, I know that at the center of this great whirling blue marble planet is an iron core. And that iron core is in rotation, and that is creating an electrical field. And this is a chemical Earth. This is a pre-biological Earth, where there is methane and nitrogen and oxygen and carbon forming this great primordial soup. And then, because of this rotating molten iron core creating an electrical field, the potential energy charges are building as these clouds of different gases are moving up and down until there is a tremendous lightning strike, creating, as far as we know, or at least one of the theories, the only instant of abiogenesis that has ever occurred on our planet, with the catalyzation of those inert chemical elements into the first amino acids. And the way that I pictured it that night, and the way that I picture it still, is I try and imagine which one of those amino acids was coquettish and which one was brave. And when they looked at one another, which one of them just went, and they came together, and those two amino acids came together for some reason, and building upon that initial structure grew the first link in our DNA chain, of which you and I and everyone who is listening to us, and to all of the plants that I'm surrounded by, and all of the animals and all of the crickets that you can hear, and all of them grow from that central moment. And I believe, I have no way of proving this, but it is part of my faith, that what we feel when we're around other human beings, when we're around other life, we've evolved to call that love. That's our evolutionary adaptation, but it's that same force that draws us back to the unity. And so I like to think that the purpose of life is it all comes from that initial amino acid kiss. And we're part of a process, and all of this is life around us. We're just one small part. And so when I think about that line, it is that we are here, this individual body, this individual soul, mind, consciousness, what have you. And our first step is to apprehend, to take in all of that beauty and all of that love and that life that surrounds us. Once we have apprehended it, once we've taken it in through our senses, it lives in our heart, where we can generate more of it. We can create more of that love. And once we have apprehended and created, we then have a duty and a responsibility to turn it around and to transmit it. And all of that is apprehending, creating, and transmitting love in what I believe are its three fundamental wavelengths of truth, beauty, and light.
Amazing. I love it.
You can't do that shit if you kill yourself in a bathtub.
Correct. Well, for one, am so glad that you didn't, and that you are here to share your story and your theory, and teach us about love. Thank you so much. I appreciate you and your time and your vulnerability.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I appreciate your taking the time to do this as well. The work is crucially important, and also because I live in a capitalistic society, despite my best wishes to, I need to plug my website so people can eventually buy my book.
Yes,
Tallon.com. If you want to read a very entertaining introduction, it's there on the page. Check it out, join my mailing list, and follow me on all the socials and all that stuff. And if there's absolutely anything that I can do in the future, Janet, to help out you, or to help out the the podcast, I am more than willing to do it.
Thank you
So
so
thank you very
much.
much for the opportunity to share the story.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.